All right, hi travel writers. So in lieu of last week's pitch critique, which we didn't do, here is a slightly belated other little insight from me into some of the stories that worked and didn't work in my past. Last time we did three of my most successful stories. I promised you three of my least successful stories, which we're going to dive into today. And these are all from CNN Travel again. I kind of half apologize for that and I half don't. It's been more than 10 years since I left CNN. But I think that was the place where I was writing and commissioning on a daily basis and with potentially millions of viewers for some of these stories that really kind of focuses you. And so I think it gives some good insights into how I was thinking as an editor, the pressures I was under as an editor, which can be useful for writers when they're pitching stories to editors, even today. So let us get on with it. Three stories that probably should have been done a little bit differently. The first of which is this: Why Sex is Better in Hotels and Other Confessions of a Constant Traveler. Now, this story, I think, is the one that came closest to getting me fired. I should say I haven't written any of these stories, but I did commission them and I managed them. And this one was just, I mean, I'm surprised it's still up, to be honest. It's still here live on CNN's site. But this was a story that came in, and this is not her name, by the way, as we'll find out in a second. Um, but this is a story that, I was in a period, this was published in 2013. I was pushing out, two or three stories a day, managing them, which is multiple a week. This wasn't a story. I remember it came in from this woman who wanted to write about her life in hotels. And her headline did not have sex in the title. Sex was certainly not the focus of the story she wanted to write. It's more about just her as a professional with a wealthy professional husband that spent, 250 days a year in hotels, and how she thought that gave them. Can't even remember what her original pitch was, but it's basically like how life is great when you're living out of hotels and not as bad. Living out of a suitcase is not as bad as people think it is. And she kind of had several reasons for that. And I can't remember if she pitched this as a listicle or what it was, but I can imagine that I probably turned this into a listicle because I was just the listicle king at this point. And if it was a listicle or if she had mentioned sex, it certainly wasn't the first point. So her talking about sex in hotels would have been further down the story when she submitted it. It wouldn't have been the main focus of her story, but me being the editor that I was, knowing that traffic was important and knowing that sex in headlines and this kind of headline would generate much more traffic than simply, oh, why I love hotels as a constant traveler kind of thing. I rejigged the article, turned it into a listicle, put sex, the wild sex at the top. Um, Let me just quickly go into it. So, hotels have been a large part of my domestic life. I met my husband, who constantly travels for work in the lobby of hotel. First, second, and third dates were all in hotels. He first told me he loved me in a hotel. I realized I loved him at the Peninsula in Hong Kong. We had 2 years of a blissful home life, all in hotels. After we married, we tried to settle down. It should have been a happy time evolving from hotel skipper to homemaker. But the more we nested, the more I yearned for the freedom of hotels. They had become my habitat. Houses are so complicated, so full of banal details. Hotels are carefree above all trivialities. Life is the same: sleeping, walking, sleeping, waking, working, eating, sex. But a hotel, everything is touched with novelty. Here's why everything in life is better in a hotel. So it's quite a nicely written piece. I imagine I did some editing on it, of course. But yes, the wild sex obviously was the attention grabber for this piece. And when I published it, I didn't think that this was a kind of a crazy story. It was just, like I say, one of the many I was going to publish that week. But as soon as this went up, a real kind of conservative American crowd got wind of it and started commenting both here on the article when CNN still had comments on its articles, on the social posts. I got emails from the writer saying she was getting emails at her work. If they'd tracked her down to her work and she was getting threats and all sorts. I saw in the comments she was getting called all sorts of horrible names. And it just became really difficult for her. So I then changed her name to try and give us some kind of protection, although this had already gone like wildfire through. I don't quite know how it got picked up. I imagine some forum picked it up and it just started spreading and people started commenting on it. But I changed her name without informing my managing editors, tried to protect her, and it didn't work. And I think once my managing editors found out that this story was kind of framed like this, was a little bit, I don't know if you'd call it vulgar, but just, like I've said before, I always push, don't be scared of being opinionated, of being edgy, of being a little subversive. But this was an example of where that kind of crossed the line, which was hard to predict. I would say it would be very difficult to forecast the kind of reaction that this story got. But then changing her name without telling anybody, not being transparent, not kind of bringing in my managing editors as soon as I saw this was going a little bit out of hand, and asking for their assistance, just trying to do it all by myself and kind of sweep it under the rug to some extent was my mistake. So this was kind of a learning process for me as an editor. You'll see we added this editor's note. CNN has changed the original byline on the story to a pseudonym and removed an image of the author at her request after careful consideration. So just an example of a story where I actually think it's a good topic. Why not? Why not? Let's talk about sex in hotels. It happens, and if somebody's willing to write a kind of an edgy story about it, and it wasn't all about sex. She talks here about perfect sleep, the morning after, dignified breakfast, the lobby, domestic harmony. So there's lots of aspects to the piece, but putting sex in the headline, and then those little kind of editorial things that I did to try and protect her, but that were slightly unprofessional, kind of came back to hit me. I didn't get fired, and she's fine. And we kind of exchanged a couple of emails in the couple of weeks after this, just to make sure that everything was okay and everything was fine. But yeah, one story that I should have handled a lot differently, probably. Okay, so the next one. What is it? Okay, it's this one. Asia's most sinful city. So I had to go into the Internet Archive to find this one. This one has been unpublished. This was a story that was written by an intern, and I think this one originally came in when he originally pitched it to me. So he was an intern just out of Hong Kong University, I think, or interning in his final year within the CNN newsroom. I think he originally said to me something like he wanted to write about Taipei being a city of gluttony because he knew it quite well, I think. And I said, well, if we're going to do that, let's do the whole list of sins and pick a city for each. So the idea for this story was picking one of the 7 deadly sins and then allocating it to a city in Asia, not in a mean-spirited or kind of critical way, to be honest, in actually quite a celebratory way for a lot of these. But it got taken the wrong way, particularly by readers in Taiwan. So the idea of gluttony in Taipei, we chose that because there's just so many food markets, and I think we've got a line here. Taipei sports 18 streets dedicated to nothing other than food, where you might usually expect a bus shelter. Instead, you'll find a barbecue. Sideways become snack stalls. A pungent smell of stinky tofu fills the air. So, but the readers in Taipei, and let's just move through it, didn't like that. And you'll see just another little kind of insider insight here. We actually paginated this. For every item had its own page because, again, that drove up page views, which at the time was a very important metric for us. So sloth we chosen for Seoul in Korea. I'm not entirely sure why, because they love just playing computer games, and it had been ranked the 15th laziest country in the world and the first in Asia by the Daily Beast. So there was a little bit of kind of research and study into this. Number 3 was Pride in the Philippines. We actually found this funny because one of our web developers was a Filipino who just was constantly looking in the mirror. So that was kind of a bit of an inside joke for us, I think. Greed in Shenzhen. Lust for Tokyo. Anyway, you get the idea. But the one that really that made this one of my more regrettable stories was choosing gluttony for Taipei. And if I just show you this page, so this is the Taipei Times, which is the main newspaper in Taipei. And so it actually wrote an article about this, calling out CNN's report about gluttonous Taipei raising some hackles. Goes on to explain, what the story was about. And it's not actually that critical, but it just kind of shows that some people were rather offended by this idea that we had called Taipei a gluttonous city. And also the intern that wrote this, he was also getting threats via email and kind of wrote me a very scared email saying, "What the hell am I going to do? Can we please take this down? I don't know what to do." He was really kind of shaken up by it. So again, difficult to predict, difficult to forecast that when you do something like this, you're going to get such a vitriolic kind of backlash from some areas. And for me, another good learning, because it shows that food, particularly if you relate food to a culture and say something opinionated about it, it's always going to get so much engagement, which can be great. Although I would call some of these my least successful stories, in terms of traffic and engagement, they were massively successful because they just got so much. But like I say, there's a line you can't cross, even when you're going after traffic, when you're going after that engagement. If you cross that fine line between being okay and within the bounds of what you should be doing as a journalist and as a brand, and then go straight into kind of cultural offense, that's when it can go wrong. So I think our editor-in-chief actually had to take a trip to Taiwan to try and ease things. And like I say, the government and those guys over there were not being, this wasn't a massive political issue, but it just shows that how when CNN publishes something like this, people are going to listen and pick you up on it if it slightly raises the wrong impression. Okay, and then number 3. Let's get rid of these. Oh, hold on. This one. Oh, that was Asia's most sinful cities. Sorry, I've gone and chosen the wrong one. So this one was an I report. Let me see if I can find the story from the Internet Archive. Here we go. The most revolting food. So this one, again, food related. If anything, if you want to take anything away from this little video, it's just how food can really get people talking and get the emotions running riot if you're not careful about it. So iReport has been disbanded for several years, but iReport was a user-generated thing that CNN did, where anybody could submit pictures, story ideas for publishing on the iReport page, which was basically just stuff that our audience was publishing. So we put out an iReport request for disgusting foods. And this was the title: "The most revolting food I've had is," inviting people to send in their most disgusting foods. And the one that caused all the hoo-ha was, again, number 1, century eggs from China. So this is them. They're actually delicious. I love them. Tamilok from the Philippines, fermented chips in Indonesia, dog meat from South Korea, fried tarantula in Cambodia, cicadas in Thailand, fried frog in the Philippines. So just users, CNN readers sending in their personal things that we then selected the 7 top ones that we thought would make a good story. But this one went crazy. This is just one of the stories from VOA where a firm had demanded an apology. A firm that actually created, that produced eggs, demanded an apology. This also went kind of crazy on many other different news outlets and blogs. And I think this guy, the reporter Danny Holwerda, was also getting death threats and all sorts from people that were offended by his the offense he took at having to eat century eggs in China. So not much to say about this. I don't think I actually managed this one from the outset. It was just the repercussions I had to help with. But this was, again, just shows that what you think is kind of an innocent, slightly funny take on a story can, in some cultures, in some places, really be taken the wrong way. And when you're a big brand like CNN, that sort of thing has to be considered before you assign a story or include something in a story. And there were other examples of this kind of thing too. We did There was another story about the world's most offensive memorials or something. And I think one of the statues we chose in Russia, suddenly all the Russians were offended, saying that's a hugely that's a hero of ours, and you're mocking it, all this sort of stuff. So anything that kind of picks at or is slightly insensitive to the cultural nuances of certain things can be a tricky line to navigate. So um, we can look back and I can kind of laugh at some of these now, and you can see that this one is only on the Internet Archive as well. It has since been unpublished, and I think there are some other stories here, but I think a lot of the time it's just the headline. You could just change this to be the most unusual food or the most exciting food. The content would all be exactly the same. Maybe you'd kind of just tone down some of the words like disgusting and that sort of thing. Um, his quote is quite funny. It's awful. It tastes like the devil cooked eggs for me. It tastes like something that used to be an egg, but made some really horrible choices. So it's funny, it's funny for us, I guess, but in some cultures it doesn't go down so well. But just tweaking, fine-tuning the angle, turning that revolting word to unusual or exciting or exotic, would really flip this into a story that maybe actually some people would see as a celebration rather than as a kind of a mocking, scathing look at stuff that on the outset does have a very kind of US centric, Western centric, oh, what weird foods those exotics in the East eats kind of thing. But yeah, interesting and maybe something to learn from. So hope that helps. Thanks, guys. Well, stay tuned for the next one.